Hello, Mr. Montalvo, U.S. History. Today, we're going to start off Unit 5, Lesson 2, the United States involvement in World War II, Day 1 and 2. So we're going to examine the role of the Tuskegee Airmen within the segregated military during World War II. In addition to that, we're going to examine American involvement in World War II, including American strategy in the Pacific and the invasion of Normandy on what would become known as D-Day. Now, an important term to understand in going into today's lesson is that of segregation. And segregation, in its simplest definition, is the action or state of setting someone or something apart from other people or other things, or being set apart. And unfortunately, we have many examples of this in our understanding or our learning of American history. So many African Americans decided to pursue a double V campaign, or victory over the enemy abroad and victory over discrimination back at home. Nearly 1 million African Americans served World War II in segregated units commanded by white officers. And this is pretty much the trend for African American involvement in the military up until World War II, up until this point. President Roosevelt spoke outwardly against the segregation of America's military, but the practice continued. The Tuskegee Airmen were African American fighter pilots who destroyed more than 400 enemy aircraft. In the Army, African American soldiers formed artillery and tank units as well. In early 1942, the situation looked bleak for the Allies. The German war machine seemed unbeatable, and German submarines were sinking Allied ships much more quicker than they could rebuild them. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the Japanese seized Wake Island, Hong Kong, and Singapore. As a result, General Douglas MacArthur was named commander of the forces in the Pacific. And so we have to understand World War II being played out in two arenas, in two stages. The Pacific, focusing on the Japanese, and the European arena, focusing on the expanding German Empire. Meanwhile, the Japanese pressed on and captured Malaya, Burma, and the Dutch West Indies. Soon, the U.S. Navy met the Japanese in the Coral Sea near Java in May 1922. After a 3-day battle, the Japanese turned back. 1 month later, the United States won the Battle of Midway Island. In this battle, American planes sank 4 Japanese aircraft carriers. Allied forces under the command of Dwight D. Eisenhower, pictured here, Omar Bradley, also pictured, and German Patton, began to push back the Germans in North Africa, forcing surrender. In Italy, Mussolini was overthrown. The Germans took over the capital city of Rome, and Allied troops marched into Italy, and in June 4th, 1944, they freed Rome from Nazi control. Even though the Japanese were outnumbered, they fought to the bitter end. The United States' goal in the Pacific War was to regain the Philippines and to invade Japan. To gain control of the Pacific Ocean, American forces used a strategy called island hopping. In island hopping, the Americans captured one island at a time, gradually moving their way to Japan. The Americans shelled an island. The next troops waited under heavy gunfire. Then, in hand-to-hand combat, the American soldiers overcame the Japanese. The Navajo soldiers helped the American soldiers. Using their own language, they radioed vital messages, and the Japanese were successful at intercepting the messages. However, thanks to the Navajo code talkers, they were unable to decipher those messages because the Navajo language, while it is spoken, there is no written form of it. Winston Churchill and Roosevelt urged the United States and Britain to send armies into France to free the country. Soon, Operation Overlord, or the invasion of Europe, had begun. General Eisenhower was appointed the commander of the Allied forces in Europe, so this would be Douglas MacArthur's counterpart in the European arena, or the European stage of the war. And soon, on June 6, 1944, D-Day as it was known, 4,000 Allied forces invaded France. On August 24, 1944, the Allied forces freed Paris from German control. At the Battle of the Bulge, Addie Murphy helped to single-handedly hold off the German troops. April 1945, FDR complained of a headache when his portrait was being painted, and hours later he died. As a result, Harry Truman then became the new president of the United States. We'll discuss in the coming days Harry Truman's involvement and wrapping up Franklin Delano Roosevelt's involvement. But before we delve into that, attached to this lesson is a primary source analysis, taking a look at D-Day in Normandy with a video attached of the actual footage. In addition to that, in summing up our conversation, try to explain the American involvement in World War II, including the American strategy in the Pacific and the invasion of Normandy on D-Day. And that's all for today. Thank you.